the many years, powered industrial trucks, which are also known as forklifts, have become a widespread staple in almost all industries. Along with the growth of material handling equipment, there has been a wide range of equipment, from battery-operated equipment to diesels, gasoline, or propane-powered, in capacities of less than 2,500 pounds to over 100,000 pounds. Included is a wide variety of equipment, such as attachments that can be used to extend forklift capabilities for special uses, lifting, or carrying requirements. The more technology progresses, the more important it is for professional operation of the equipment. In this program, we'll discuss forklifts, which are also called powered industrial trucks. Whatever name used, they require professionals to operate them. The past 20 years has seen a variety of training programs for forklift operators, ranging from get on it and don't have any accidents to complete comprehensive training and performance testing and evaluations. New governmental rules have made training mandatory, and that training must be quite specific. Specific to the equipment you operate and specific to the conditions under which they are operated. No two facilities are alike. Therefore, site-specific training is required. This means anyone required to operate forklifts must be trained and evaluated by knowledgeable and experienced trainers and supervisors. But exactly what does this mean? Anyone required to operate forklifts must be trained in a wide variety of topics, including engineering principles, forklift operating rules, equipment characteristics, environmental hazards, operator maintenance, hazardous locations, surface operating conditions, site-specific operations, potential hazards, and other information. This program cannot cover all aspects of the required training because new government standards require employers to make the training site-specific for your workplace and the potential hazards that may exist in your company or area of operations. Training should include 3 distinct methodologies. First, there's academic or classroom training. This program covers the majority of the required classroom training, but your company amplifies this training by making your training site-specific to your operations. Next, operators must be provided hands-on training to ensure operators fully understand controls, equipment performance, individual characteristics of each forklift equipment they will be operating, and the potential hazards that may be encountered in your work area or organization. The third method of training is evaluation. Through the evaluation process, operators can learn from mistakes and improve their performance. An evaluation means an experienced person, such as a trainer or supervisor, who has the knowledge, training, and experience to train and evaluate operators' competency in forklift operations. The evaluator observes individuals who operate forklifts to determine their safe operation of the vehicle, how the operator observes safety rules, and how the operator knows, understands, and handles the equipment. The 4 primary topics or areas to be covered in the training program must include: number 1, the general hazards that apply to the operation of all or most powered industrial trucks. 2, the hazards associated with the operation of particular types of trucks. 3, the hazards of workplaces generally. And 4, the hazards of the particular workplace where the forklift is operated, also called site-specific training. The purpose of this type of training is to make sure potential hazards in each specific location or workplace are identified, and forklift operators are more aware of the specific potential hazards. The new rule states, the training program shall be presented to all new operators regardless of previous experience. That's fairly clear. All new operators must be trained regardless of their experience. To avoid duplication of training, the new rule also states, an employee who has received training and been found by an evaluation to be competent to perform the duties of an operator safely does not have to be retrained at specific intervals. However, all new operators must have their performance evaluated. If an operator has previously received training in a topic required by the rules, and such training is appropriate to the truck and working conditions encountered, additional training in that topic is not required if the operator has been evaluated and found competent to operate the truck safely. How that person's competency is evaluated is up to the company. This can be through testing and examination, performance evaluation, or other means of evaluating the level of previous training. All forklift operators must be evaluated at least every 3 years. Certification. Certification of training and competency must be documented for all persons who operate powered industrial equipment. This certification must contain the name of the operator, the date of training, the date of the evaluation, and the identity of the person or persons performing the training or evaluation. Documentation is extremely important for a variety of reasons. Therefore, each company should maintain records of what training was conducted, who conducted the training, who was trained, when operators were trained, and what was included in the evaluation or performance testing. We cannot stress enough that proper training documentation be maintained of all forklift operators. Government rules do not require forklift operators' licenses, but many companies have found them useful and helps reduce unauthorized use of forklifts by uncertified persons. General types of equipment. As we stated earlier, there is a wide range of equipment, each designed for specific industries and uses. Manufacturers classified powered industrial trucks according to each truck's individual characteristics. There are 7 classes of trucks. Class 1. These are electric motor, sit-down rider, counterbalance trucks, and they use either pneumatic or solid tires. Class 2. Electric motor narrow aisle trucks that use only solid tires. Class 3. Electric motor hand or hand rider trucks that use solid tires. These are commonly referred to as electric pallet jacks. Class 4. Internal combustion engine trucks using solid tires. These are the most common types of forklifts. They can be gas, diesel, or propane powered. Class 5. Internal combustion engine trucks using pneumatic tires. Class 6. Electric and internal combustion engine tractors with pneumatic tires. Class 7. Rough terrain forklift trucks which use pneumatic tires. These are more commonly used in construction. Each of the different types of powered industrial trucks has unique characteristics and inherent hazards. To be most effective, training must address the unique characteristics of the type of vehicle operators are being trained to operate. Before we move on, let's take a quick look at solid and pneumatic tires. Pneumatic tires are tires filled with air, just like your automobile tire. They are designed so the forklift can maneuver in uneven, ungraded terrain surfaces. The tires are more flexible and can adjust to the changing surfaces on which they drive. Solid tires are exactly what their name implies. They are made of solid rubber or other materials. These tires must be used on smooth, fairly even surfaces. Solid tires are not flexible, but provide excellent wear. However, they can be cut or damaged. When solid tires must be replaced, it requires the use of a high-pressure press, which presses the tire onto the forklift wheel. Technicians with proper equipment perform the demounting and mounting of solid tires. Engineering principles. Perhaps one of the most important, yet misunderstood parts of any forklift training program is the engineering principles of the equipment. Unless you have this knowledge, it's difficult to understand some of the safety rules relating to forklift operations and certainly detracts from your ability to make good judgments when lifting odd-sized and difficult loads. This program focuses on some basic principles, but they are a very necessary part of professional forklift training and operations. You should learn these basic principles, and if you are unclear or have any questions, please ask your supervisor or trainer to explain them more fully and answer your questions. Automobiles and forklifts. Is there any difference in operating or driving an automobile and a forklift? Absolutely. An automobile is steered by turning the steering wheel, which in turn moves the front wheels and tires in the direction in which you're steering. The front tires turn and move the automobile in the direction you want to turn or travel. Forklift steering is just the opposite. When you turn the steering wheel, the rear tires move to change direction. Forklift steering is totally different than steering an automobile, which is why you need training and experience to understand these differences. Automobiles and forklifts both generally use hydraulic braking systems. When you step on an automobile brake, hydraulic fluid is compressed through the master cylinder to wheel cylinders, which apply force to the brakes to stop the vehicle. Forklifts with hydraulic brakes operate basically the same way. However, only certain battery-operated forklifts, such as the large sit-down units, use hydraulic brakes. Others may employ mechanical systems actuated by electronic solenoids, such as order selectors. Still others, similar to walkie pallet trucks, have mechanical systems. On many electric trucks, when an operator removes his or her foot off the electric forklift accelerator or standing pad, friction stops the electric forklift. It's a different sensation, and stopping distances are somewhat different, again pointing to the need for training and getting used to the different type of equipment. An engine must power forklifts, just as an automobile must be powered. Some forklifts use combustion engines, which use gasoline, diesel, propane, or they can be powered by electrical motors. Propane forklifts are used more often, particularly in warehouses and inside areas. The fuel is cleaner. However, propane does emit carbon monoxide and is a highly flammable gas. Another difference between automobiles and forklifts is that forklifts do not have shock absorbers. An automobile uses shock absorbers or struts to keep the tires firmly on the road surface while the vehicle is in motion, which reduces bouncing of the tires. Automobiles also have a 4-point suspension system. This means the automobile is supported by 4 points of a suspension system. Forklift engineers have designed forklifts on a 3-point suspension system, even if the forklift has 3 or 4 wheels. Since forklifts don't have shock absorbers, a pivot pin in the center of the axle supports the forklift's rear end. This allows for the up and down movement of the rear tires when traveling over bumps and uneven surfaces. The pivot point and the front tires make up the 3-point suspension system. The truck's steer axle is attached to the truck by a pivot pin in the axle's center. This 3-point suspension system forms an imaginary triangle called the stability triangle. The technical definition of the stability triangle is when the vehicle's line of action, or load center, falls within the stability triangle, the vehicle is stable and will not tip over. However, when the vehicle's line of action, or the vehicle and load combination, falls outside the stability triangle, the vehicle is unstable and may tip over. When the combined center of gravity of the truck and load move outside the lines of this triangle, the forklift will overturn. There are many situations in which this can occur. Fast, sharp turns can cause the center of gravity to shift outside the triangle. Lifting a heavy load and tilting the mast forward or backward while moving. Having a heavy load lifted, then running over a piece of wood or other uneven surface can cause a shift in the center of gravity and overturn the vehicle. Fulcrum principle. Let's begin with the lever principle, specifically the fulcrum principle. Technically, the fulcrum is truck's axis of rotation when it tips over. Simply stated, you have two weights balanced on a fulcrum like a playground seesaw. On the forklift, one weight is the heavy rear end or counterweight and the weight of the truck. The fulcrum point in this case is your front tires, and the other weight is the load you're carrying. The counterweight balances the load with the front tires as the fulcrum point. The counterweight is the heavy metal part of the forklift that compensates for loads and determines the proper safe lifting capacities. Never add a different or additional counterbalance to any forklift without the manufacturer's approval. By modifying the forklift, you may have significantly changed a variety of important engineering principles such as center of gravity, safe lifting capacity, maximum load height, or other unsafe conditions. One of the most important safety considerations when operating forklifts and raising loads is never tilt raised loads forward, except when the load is in a deposit position over a rack or stack. When stacking or tiering, only enough backward tilt to stabilize the load is to be used. We'll discuss raised loads more in a few minutes. Forklift data plate. The next important factor is the information contained on the data plate, which is generally located on the front panel of your forklift. This information is developed and provided by the forklift manufacturer. The data plate gives you the make, model, and serial number of the equipment. It also states exactly how much weight can be safely lifted and how high the load may be lifted. The data plate generally states the lifting capacity in three different classifications, such as 24-inch load centers, 36-inch load centers, and 42-inch load centers, depending upon the size of your equipment. The data plate also specifies how high the load can be lifted at specific load weights and load centers. Never modify or change the forklift in any manner without approval from the manufacturer. Modifying or changing the forklift can adversely affect safe lifting capacities and can create conditions to make the forklift hazardous to operate. Attachments. Attachments to forklifts can dramatically change the equipment's safe lifting capacity. Attachments come in a wide variety of uses and sizes. There are side shifters, which allow the load to be moved from side to side. There are pipe attachments that contain or hold the pipes being lifted. In this case, it can specifically affect the lateral stability of the forklift. There are other specialty attachments designed for specific loads. Next, there are a variety of booms, which extend the ability of the forklift to lift long loads. When using boom attachments, the longitudinal stability of the lift truck is affected and greatly decreases the safe lifting capacities of the forklifts. Next, there are other attachments, such as floor sweepers, tippers, or trash hauling attachments. Rams for specific service, such as lifting large wire coils and other uses. There are platforms used as attachments to protect people when being lifted on the forklift. Other attachments could include barrel attachments, which are designed primarily for lifting drums and barrels. Regardless of the attachment used, keep in mind the equipment manufacturer must approve this equipment. Forklift operators must fully understand how each particular attachment changes the safe lifting capacity of the forklift, the stability of the truck, and other potentially hazardous changes to the forklift on which you are using the attachment. Fork extensions, which are inserted over the forklift's existing forks, should not be longer than 150% of the supporting fork's length. By using forklift extensions, the safe lifting capacity is decreased. Fork extensions and all attachments must be attached to the forklift to prevent unintentional disengagement from the forks. Load centers. Before we explain what all this means, let's explain load center. The load center of a forklift is the distance measured from the center of the load to the vertical face of the forks. If you have a pallet that is 48 inches by 48 inches and you have an evenly distributed load on this size pallet, you have a 24-inch load center. If you have an evenly distributed load on a longer-sized pallet, you no longer have a 24-inch load center. If you use attachments extending the load center, obviously the lifting capacity of the forklift can be seriously diminished. The forklift manufacturer must approve forklift attachments. This approval information must be displayed on the attachment or forklift for the attachment to be legally used on each specific forklift. Let's go back to the data plate and those three different lifting capacities. Each size forklift has different capacities, but we'll use a capacity of 5,000 pounds at a 24-inch load center that can be safely lifted to a height of 104 inches. Keep in mind, all safe lifting capacities are based upon the load center and the mast being raised in a vertical or straight position. If you tilt the mast forward when lifting, what are you doing to the load center? You're extending the load center because of the extra weight of the mast and the extension of the forks, thereby reducing your safe lifting capacity as stated on the data plate. When lifting anything, think about the load center of the load, the mast position, and the weight of the load. Manufacturers provide basic weights and safe lifting capacities on the data plate. For example, where the forklift is rated at 5,000 pounds on a 24-inch load center, a 36-inch load center may decrease your lifting capacity to 4,000 pounds, and a 42-inch load center may decrease your lifting capacity to 3,000 pounds. If you add an attachment to the equipment, the safe lifting capacity may be reduced even more dramatically. Centers of gravity. Another engineer principle that affects your safe lifting capacity is the center of gravity. Technically, the center of gravity is the point on an object at which all the object's weight is concentrated. For symmetrical loads, the center of gravity is at the middle of the load. Certainly, if you have a forklift unloaded, you have one center of gravity. If you have a forklift with a load, that center of gravity changes. So the entire object, in this case the forklift and load, is the concentration of weight of the forklift and load. Additionally, as you raise a load, the center of gravity shifts away from the truck and towards the forks. Forklift engineers designed the forklift with this in mind and calculated this center of gravity shift in determining the safe lifting capacities. When equipment operators exceed the safe lifting capacity and try to lift excessive loads, or if they have extended load centers and try to lift heavier loads, the center of gravity can be exceeded and the forklift will tip over towards the load. That's why tilting a load while raised can be a major safety hazard. Tilt loads only when safe to do so and necessary for positioning loads onto racks or other material handling equipment. Of course, you're changing the center of gravity even more when you tilt loads. Tilting a load changes the center of gravity, and this can be very hazardous to your safety if you exceed the maximum safe lifting capacity of your particular forklift. Moving loads upward, downward, forward, and backward causes a shift of the center of gravity and can adversely affect the vehicle's stability. Avoid making jerky starts, quick turns, or sudden stops. Never use the reverse gear to stop a forklift truck. Use the brakes to stop the vehicle. When shifting from forward to reverse, the vehicle should be in a stopped position and the appropriate gear engaged before moving in the new direction. Technical terminology. We're not expecting you to remember too many technical terms, but you should be aware of some engineering definitions and how they apply to your particular forklift. First, there's the longitudinal stability. This is a fancy word that is the truck's resistance to overturning forward or rearward. This is demonstrated when you use boom attachments. Lateral stability is the truck's resistance to overturning sideways, as when using pipe attachments or extremely wide loads. Each class and size of equipment has different longitudinal and lateral stability principles, so it's up to you to remember how these affect your operation. A very short forklift would have less longitudinal stability than a very large or long forklift. Let's say you're driving a small, short forklift, and while traveling, you hit a 4-inch curb. Quite possibly, the longitudinal stability of this short forklift may cause you to overturn, whereas a large, long forklift would probably not tip over because it has much greater longitudinal stability. Lateral stability on forklifts can be viewed as wide or narrow equipment. If you have a wide-track vehicle, your lateral stability is much greater than a much narrower type forklift. This means that narrow vehicles have much less lateral stability and can tip over sideways more easily than wide-track vehicles. The term track is simply the distance between the wheels on the same axle of the truck. Wheelbase is the distance between the center line of the vehicle's front and rear wheels. Don't become confused with this terminology. Just understand the basic principles of the equipment. Operator responsibility. By understanding the engineering principles, you can see exactly why safety rules state that forklifts should never be driven with a load raised more than 4 to 6 inches off the traveling surface. A raised load can exceed the stability triangle and create a condition where the forklift can overturn. Speeding and fast turns, making sharp corner turns, cause the vehicle's center of gravity to shift outside the stability triangle as well. Your employer is responsible for providing the proper forklift for the environmental area in which you operate. This means that if there is a hazard of an explosion from certain dusts or combustible atmospheres, a certain type of forklift is required, which is approved for operations in these atmospheres. Additional training and instruction must be provided when operating in potentially hazardous atmospheres or environments. That certainly isn't all the engineering principles involved in forklift safety, but it gives you a better understanding of why safety rules should be obeyed to the letter. Poor judgment, forgetting to think about the weight of the load center, and the truck's center of gravity and stability triangle have caused many accidents and injuries. Being a professional forklift operator is more than just driving. It's being responsible, knowledgeable, and of course applying these engineering principles every time you lift a load, add an attachment, or operate your vehicle. Basic forklift operating rules. When used safely, forklifts save you time and make your job much easier. Anyone operating forklift equipment must be trained and authorized by the company. Once you're trained, evaluated, certified, and authorized, the rest is up to you. You're expected to have the maturity and responsibility to operate this equipment efficiently and safely. Again, we can't cover every forklift safety rule, but let's explain some basic safe operating rules to provide the basics upon which to build a professional understanding of forklifts and forklift safety rules. Always follow your company's forklift operating procedures, policies, and rules. Speeding. Let's begin with the most common hazard, and that's speeding on forklifts. Forklifts are designed for operation at the speed of a person walking at a normal pace. You don't have speedometers on forklift equipment, but approximately 5 miles per hour is the maximum speed. You have to use your judgment on proper speed because in some cases, such as when turning or operating near pedestrians, 5 miles per hour may be too fast. It's okay to work hard and not waste time, but when you're operating forklifts, safety is the most important part of your responsibility. Riders. Next, riders. Absolutely no riders allowed on forklift equipment. That includes riding near the operator, on the rear, sides, and certainly not on the forks or on a pallet placed on the forks. If you must elevate a person using the forklift, a proper platform must be used. The minimum safety requirement is the platform must be secured to the mast of the vehicle to keep it from falling or sliding off the forks. The platform must have adequate flooring for good footing and must have 42-inch high guardrails and mid-rails. Some regulatory agencies require a 7-foot high protective guard between the person on the platform and the mast to prevent a person's hand or other body parts being crushed by the mast as it raises and lowers. When anyone is elevated on a platform, the forklift operator must remain at the controls whether the motor is running or not. Seat belts and turnovers. Forklift manufacturers are not required to install seat belts on forklift equipment. However, if seat belts are installed, your company may require you to wear seat belts. While we're on this subject, let's take a couple of seconds to explain some safety action that the Industrial Truck Association recommends if you are involved in a forklift turnover. It's up to your company to establish a policy relating to the action that you should take to protect yourself in case this occurs. The ITA states that studies on forklift turnovers usually result in minor injuries if the forklift operator stays with the vehicle instead of jumping off. The normal tendency is for a person to jump downward so the driver lands on the floor or ground, usually directly in the path of the overhead guard. In a tip-over of a sit-down truck, the operator should lean away from the direction of fall to minimize injury. The most common result in a tip-over, where the operator jumps out, is a crushing injury to the head, neck, or back where the overhead guard strikes the operator. 42% of forklift fatalities are caused by the operator trying to jump from a tipping vehicle. To keep this from happening to you, always remember to keep the load as low as possible and stay with the vehicle if it tips over. Wearing your seatbelt is the best safety measure. On the other hand, in stand-up rider trucks, the truck operator can simply step backwards, perpendicular to the direction of fall, to minimize the potential for injury. Raised loads. Driving forklifts with raised loads is unsafe, as the center of gravity of the forklift and load changes as you move. When traveling with a load, keep the load as close to the floor surface as possible, which means the forks are raised about 2 to 6 inches off the floor. This prevents the forks from hitting the floor. Of course, if the floor surface is slightly bumpy, 4 to 6 inches off the floor surface may be preferred. In this position, the forks and mast should be tilted back slightly to help stabilize the load toward the mast and a better center of gravity. However, when you stop and are ready to elevate the load, move the mast back to the vertical or straight position. It's hazardous to raise a load when the mast is tilted to the rear or forward, since this can disrupt the longitudinal stability of the truck. Never leave a forklift unattended with a raised load. Of course, never allow anyone to walk under a raised load. Keep pedestrians away when you have a raised load. When you have a person raised in a platform, it is recommended that pedestrians stay 1 foot away from the cage for every foot the cage is raised. This means if a person is raised 10 feet, pedestrians should stay at least 10 feet away from the raised platform. When raising a load, such as positioning the load into a rack or storage space, think about the overhead. Will the load hit a sprinkler pipe or other object? Broken doorways, lights, and other objects are a result of equipment operators not watching where they are moving with a raised load. The red light should go on any time when you're raising a load, and remember that raised loads should not be tilted forward, except when you're over a rack or tier ready to deposit the load. While we're talking about maneuvering loads, if the load you're carrying is too high and blocks your vision, drive in reverse. Always look in the direction you're traveling. Many accidents have occurred because equipment operators weren't watching where they were going. Forks should always be placed under the load as far as possible, and never lift a load with one fork. Steering and operating surfaces. In tight spaces, watch out for the rear end swing. The rear tires are your steering tires, and it's quite easy to bump into walls, doors, and people if you're not watching the rear end swing. Be particularly careful when maneuvering in congested or tight spaces. The vast majority of property damage by forklift operators is caused by inattention to the rear end swing. Keep your arms, legs, head, and other body parts inside the running lines of the vehicle. This protects the operator from injury, especially when passing other forklifts and when maneuvering near storage racks and other materials. Never try to pass or overtake another forklift traveling in the same direction. Drive with both hands on the steering wheel, and of course, horseplay is prohibited. Attachments to the steering wheel, such as spinner knobs, are prohibited. Never operate your equipment with wet or greasy hands. Naturally, floor surfaces should be clean, but if you encounter wet or damp areas, always slow down. Report any grease or hydraulic fluid leaks so the floor surface can be cleaned. If you operate forklifts over railroad tracks, always cross the railroad tracks in a diagonal position. This is the most stable position when crossing railroad tracks. Forklifts with solid-type tires may only be operated on asphalt or concrete surfaces. Forklifts with pneumatic-type tires may be operated only on asphalt, concrete, or improved surfaces such as gravel roadways. If forklifts must be driven on public highways, such as crossing from one location to another across the street, follow your company's policies and procedures while using extreme caution. Keep in mind that you're operating a forklift, which has a different steering system than automobiles. Many operators get confused in emergencies because of rear wheel steering and the vehicle being powered by the front wheels. Training and experience are the keys to safe steering of forklift equipment. Docks and ramps. On loading docks, keep forklifts away from the edge of loading docks. A slight miscalculation can become a nasty accident. Another good rule around loading docks is to always be sure trailer wheels are chocked and the truck is properly braked. If the trailer is disconnected from the truck, you may use a stabilizing jack to prevent the forklift from overturning the trailer. Dock plates provide a smooth surface over which to enter trucks and trailers. Make sure the dock plate is in good condition and is properly placed between the trailer and dock to prevent movement of the dock plate. The lip of the dock plate must be fully seated onto the trailer bed. You should have good lighting inside trailers and trucks so you can see what you're doing. On ramps, the forklift safety rule is very simple. Keep the load upgrade when going up or down a ramp. Drive up, back down is the best advice. If you're using a ramp onto a trailer, the weight of the ramp must be on the trailer bed and the bottom base plate of the ramp on the ground. Operators should maintain a safe distance from the edge of the ramp and drive at a creep speed. Of course, never overload any ramp or dock plate, so that means you should know the safe capacity of the ramp that includes the weight of the forklift and the load. Braking and parking. Okay, everyone is driving at a safe speed, watching where they're going, paying attention to others in the area, exercising caution when loading or unloading trailers and trucks. Now it's time to stop and park your vehicle. Basically, anytime you stop and get off your vehicle, the forks must be on the floor and the parking brake engaged and set. That's a minimum requirement. Forks must be on the floor and the parking brake set. If you're going to be away from your vehicle more than 25 feet, shut off the motor. Some companies prefer the key to be removed as well to prevent unauthorized persons from operating the equipment. Naturally, try to park the vehicle in such a manner as to keep the forks from becoming tripping hazards. Don't block aisles or exit doors with your forklift or materials. Exit doors and electrical panels must remain unblocked at all times. All the things we've just talked about are nothing more than common sense and your good judgment. You're professionals. With experience and knowledge, all you have to do is apply basic safety to your daily operations and work habits, and you'll be on your way to better efficiency, productivity, and safety. Pedestrians. Forklift operators will tell you that one of their major complaints is pedestrians. Pedestrians don't pay attention to forklift operators. They walk out in front of forklifts and, in general, are safety hazards to forklift operations. It's not the fault of the forklift operators. Of course, these things happen, and people who work around or near forklifts, but are not forklift operators, should be trained also. They should be made aware that forklifts are noisy, and often operators can't hear pedestrians walking nearby. Pedestrians have safety responsibilities as well, and this means paying attention to where you walk and be on the lookout for forklifts. Just as when you're operating a motor vehicle, pedestrians should be given the right-of-way. If someone walks in front of you, stop and allow them to pass. Sound horns around corners and aisleways. Operators should never drive toward any person who is in front of a fixed object or wall. Operators should always look in the direction of travel. If the load obstructs your view, drive backwards. Operators entering a building or nearing a blind corner must make their approach at reduced speed and sound the horn. Safety is a team effort, and it requires both the forklift operator and pedestrians to make safety a reality. Forklift maintenance. As part of your professional forklift equipment operator's responsibilities, your company may require each operator to inspect and perform operator maintenance at the beginning and end of each shift. Make it a habit to check your vehicle every day, even if someone else has been using it. Let's begin with some basic maintenance procedures. If your forklift equipment is unsafe to operate, don't use it. A vehicle is unsafe when the horn doesn't work, brakes and parking brakes are defective, or the steering has too much play to allow positive steering. If there are leaks in the fuel, oil, hydraulic, or transmission, it should be reported so that it can be repaired. Almost all forklifts have some type of minor leaks, but they should be reported so a mechanic can inspect the leak to make a determination if the forklift is safe or unsafe. Follow your company's maintenance procedures and requirements, as there may be more defects that could render your forklift unsafe to operate. Of course, always check the water, fuel, oil, hydraulic, and transmission fluids before you begin operations. Check the level of the electrolyte in the batteries as well. On electric-powered forklifts, care and maintenance of the batteries is critical. Electric forklifts must have adequately charged batteries. Operating an electric forklift with insufficient electrolyte in the battery can cause damage to the battery, and these batteries are extremely expensive. When charging batteries, be sure the charger is turned off before connecting the charging cables. Always make sure the water level is above the plates before charging, and leave the vent caps on during charging. Vent caps prevent excessive gassing during charging, reducing the chance of excessive hydrogen gas from escaping into the environment. Battery charging areas must have good ventilation. Batteries become quite hot during charging, and gas escapes, creating flammable vapors, so proper ventilation must be used in battery charging areas. Batteries should be allowed to cool before using, usually a couple of hours after charging. Again, follow your company's procedures when charging and handling batteries. Electrical equipment, such as electric forklifts, must never be stored outside or exposed to water to prevent moisture from getting into the electrical motor or electrical parts. When testing the brakes on fuel-powered equipment, if they appear to be spongy or go too far towards the floor, report it to your supervisor. To test the parking brake, start the motor, engage the brake, put the transmission in a forward gear, and see if the brake holds. If not, it needs adjusting or repair. Test the steering. Excessive play in the steering wheel is when the steering wheel moves 2 to 3 inches before the rear tires begin to move. Next, inspect the forks for cracks or defects. Inspect the heel of forks, the top of the forks where they attach to the mast, and other areas where pressure is applied. Minor cracks can lead to failure of the forks. Raise your forks about 3 to 4 inches off the ground. Then inspect the mast chains to make sure they have equal tension. If one chain is looser or tighter than the other, it could cause a load to shift and fall. Another good maintenance tip is to run the mast all the way up, then all the way down at the beginning of the shift. Quite often during daily operations, the mast is not always elevated to the maximum height. Without fluid to these areas, it may lead to the hydraulic pistons and rubber parts to dry, which can cause premature wear on these parts. Raising and lowering the mast will lubricate these critical areas. Of course, watch the overhead to make sure the mast and forks won't damage or hit any overhead structure. When you're refueling, there are some important safety tips to follow. Never refuel a forklift propane tank, gasoline, or diesel engine inside a building. Whether it's charging electric-powered forklifts or fuel-powered forklifts, the motor should be off and smoking prohibited during any refueling or battery charging operations. Small sparks can ignite gasoline, LP gas, and hydrogen gas vapors resulting from battery charging. LP gas, in addition to being flammable, is very cold. When handling or refueling propane equipment, proper protective equipment such as gloves, face, and eye protection should be worn. Additional site-specific training should be accomplished for refueling propane tanks, forklift equipment, and the potential hazards of this flammable gas. There are many more items relating to vehicle maintenance that we haven't mentioned in this program, but it's important for you to use your good judgment and experience to determine the necessary operator maintenance required on your vehicle. Inspect and make sure the radiator coils are not clogged with dust or debris. Overheated forklifts can be hazardous to the engine, as well as the forklift operator. Keep your vehicle clean, inspecting parts for cracks, leaks, broken parts, or other defects. Each company has different rules relating to operator maintenance. If you are required to perform operator maintenance, you should receive additional training on each forklift you are to operate. As a minimum, you should always check the forklift for safety. If you believe your forklift to be unsafe, report it to your supervisor so it can be inspected and repaired as necessary. The most important part of any safety program is you, the professional forklift equipment operator. If you have a professional attitude, safety will be part of your job. Forklift equipment will provide many years of useful service, but they do need special care and attention from the operator. It may seem like a small price to pay, but operator maintenance is extremely critical to a good maintenance and safety program. We've covered a wide range of topics in this program. It's only the beginning. Forklift operators in today's fast-paced environment requires training, knowledge, good judgment, and above all, a good safety attitude. Your company will provide additional training as necessary to make you aware of the specific forklift you'll be operating. Take this time to learn more about the equipment and how the engineering principles will affect the forklift and loads you'll be carrying. Study the safety rules to make sure you fully understand your responsibilities. Ask questions if you're not sure about something. According to the Industrial Truck Association, there are about 855,000 forklifts in the United States alone. Over 11% of all forklifts will be involved in some type of accident each year, assuming only one accident per forklift. This means that about 90% of all forklifts will be involved in some type of accident during their useful life. To help reduce the possibility of being injured or injuring others, it's important to know and understand your forklift, the engineering principles, the safety and maintenance rules, and of course, practice safety on each and every task you perform. Thank you.